Hello and welcome to another episode of my Aspie Marriage. In this video I want to talk about communication and the difference in styles. So for my husband, he's a quiet man. He likes to avoid conflict or drama or anything of that description, and will go out of his way to not converse about hard topics. Me, on the other hand, I'm quite open to hard topics. I am open to conversation and resolution and communication. I like to discuss things to the fullest of their possibilities and really get to the crux of what's going on and work things out. In past relationships, if I had issues, I just raised it with them or them with me. We would then discuss them and work through them. There were no sort of lingering, unresolved issues. It was usually something that we did talk about, resolve and work out. Whereas with my husband, if I raised an issue with him, his general response was to firstly yell me into submission. That is, just yell at me until I stopped talking, and then walk away and stun me for 3 days or so, and then start talking later and pretend that either everything is fine or that he was never shitty or that I was the one that was shitty. He avoids conflict because he finds it hard in the moment to think of the things that he needs to say. Now, I know this from situations where he's had 1 or 2 fallouts at work, and he has told me about those fallouts and has said that at the time he just didn't know what to say, so he just stood there saying nothing, and then afterwards all of the words and the thoughts and the ideas came to him, and he wished he'd said this and he wished he'd said that. So when it comes to conflict, he'll generally shut down because he can't find the words to put forth his opinions and ideas. And I think also he feels overwhelmed by the amount of words being thrown at him in those kinds of situations. And that was what was happening for us. If I raised an issue, and the way that I raise an issue is to just make a statement. So, for example, I might say, have you noticed that we're not talking much? Or have you heard of foreplay? So they're things that I'll say. Now, they don't sound like an attack to me. They just sound like me raising a topic. Though I'm not him, I'm not on the receiving end of that. And for him, he probably hears those questions and thinks, uh-oh, there's some big long-winded thing gonna happen here. And I don't want that. I want to avoid this. I'm just gonna cut and run. I remember in the early days, he was often saying to me that we're 2 different people. That was his observation. And I used to think that doesn't really matter because everybody's 2 different people. You're never going to get 2 people who are exactly alike. And I had that with my boyfriends. We were never the same, and certainly not the same in all aspects of everything that we ever did. However, we still managed to make it work, even with us being different. So he would say we're 2 different people, and I would be thinking that isn't actually our issue. Our issue is that we're not resolving anything. Although now I'm looking back and I'm realizing that because we are 2 different people, it was why our issues weren't getting resolved, in the sense that I'm very communicative and open, and I don't mind to keep talking until an issue is resolved. Whereas for him, it's a wall of words, and he wants to shut down and plug his ears and, do the old la 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 la. It's easier that way. It's easier to say, I don't want to talk about this, than to have a conversation and then adapt. It's even easier to turn around and just say, you're the fault of everything. I'm blaming you for everything. Because it's so much harder to think within yourself, what am I doing? How am I causing this? Can I adapt? Is there something I could do differently or try? It's just easier to say, no, it's you. You're the fault. All right? We're done here. Once I found out that he was on the spectrum, everything became more clear. I started to realize that he was overwhelmed by any statement that it was ever made. And I will just say at this point, I would have, I guess you would call them meltdowns, which is kind of interesting considering that I'm talking about somebody on the spectrum. Although maybe they might be called something else, but I would have this situation where we would have this unresolved issue that had just been swept under the rug and left there. And I'd keep trying to raise the conversation and then be shut down, try to raise the conversation and then be shut down, try to raise the conversation and then be shut down. And in the end, maybe 3-6 months, I would become distraught. I would be crying by this stage. I would be so overwhelmed with emotions and frustration and never getting to the bottom of it, never being able to even just actually talk about a conversation, that I would just kind of a verbal vomit. I'd just be like, of everything that had happened in those last 6 months. You haven't been talking to me and you said you would and now you're not and you're still not and da-da-da and kind of thing. And this would be how I would roll. And of course that would make things worse because he's now hit with this wall of words going, whoa. And I've lost him at hello. He hasn't heard a word I've said. I'm so overwhelmed and I'm throwing so many words his way that he is completely shutting down. He's looking at me and watching me, but internally he's just able to just switch off and just sit there and watch. And so at the end of my wall of words, I would say to him, and so now what are you going to do about it? And he'd just go, and I'd know that he hadn't taken in much of what I said. At that time, of course, not knowing he was autistic, I didn't understand it, but now I do. And the point that I'm getting at there is that I have since learned, and I did stop that, oh gosh, how many years ago? 10 odd years ago? I stopped doing that because I just had a realization that what I was doing wasn't working for me. I just reached this point within my own brain where I just thought, you just can't keep doing this. Firstly, it isn't working, and secondly, it's just making me feel shit, me. I would just feel at the end of that rant, let's call it a rant, I would just feel so overwhelmed and washed out and frustrated and annoyed, and I hadn't gotten a good response, and I just was like, what's the point? Let's not do this anymore. So I did stop doing that, and I tried different things to communicate with him, and they weren't working. So recently, within the last, say, 3 or 4 years or so, I've started to do this thing where I will raise an issue with him, and it will just be a sentence. And then I wait. And I wait for however long it takes for him to formulate a response. Now, somebody said to me, doesn't that get frustrating? Not really. What was more frustrating was me raising my issues with him yelling at me and then shutting down for 3 days. What was more frustrating was me having this gigantic rant and then him just shutting down completely and I get nothing. This way here, if I say to him, yada yada yada, and then just wait, and I just watch him, I can see that he's processing what I'm saying, he's taking in the sentence, he's formulating the words and then formulating his response, and then he'll say XYZ back, and then we have a conversation. So it's not necessarily an ideal conversation because it's not it's a little bit slower than that. However, we are actually getting to a point where things are getting said, they're getting heard, they're getting understood. I don't necessarily get the response I want. He will still turn around even after all these years. Did I mention we've been together for 24 years? Even after all these years, he will still say, you're the reason that this is happening, you're the reason I did that, you're the reason I feel this way. And he's probably got a point, but not really in the sense that you can't just handball it to somebody and pretend it's them and then the issue is just never resolved. So we still do get a lot of that. However, at least we are now having conversations and we are getting somewhere. So this is a good thing. In your case, is it working the same way? Have you figured out ways to communicate with your partner that work for the both of you? Please share below. I'm sure that this would be something other people would like to know as well, because it can be hard communicating with somebody on the spectrum. And of course, if you're on the spectrum, there may be ways that you prefer to communicate. And I'd love for you to leave a comment below expressing those as well. Because for me, I see this as we have to learn to adapt and grow and mesh with each other in certain ways. Relationships are complicated. Whether you're NT-NT, NT-ND, ND-ND, relationships are complicated. You've got two people with wholly different ways of going about things. They've lived this life and they've got that baggage and they've got these particular foibles. And then this person has their own. And you have to find a way to mesh. And so that's what I'm trying to do within my marriage. I'm trying to find ways that work for us. Trying to find communication styles that work. Trying to find ways that progress us and move us forward and bring about solutions to any kind of topics that are raised. So please leave a comment below sharing your findings, anything that you've tried that's worked. That would be really beneficial, I feel. And as usual, thank you so much for taking the time to watch my videos.